are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and, you guys know what it is. Joining me today, it's Kevin Durso. How are you, bud?
Not too bad, not too bad.
I'm sure you've been better.
Yeah, I think we've all been better.
As we start this show, we are about 12 hours removed from Game 7, and you guys already know how it went, right? If you're listening to a Philadelphia Flyers podcast, you know how Philadelphia Flyers Game 7 went. They lost to the New York Islanders. The season has ended. We talked about it. We talked about it on last week's show, and last week's show was pretty doom and gloom. I'm not going to lie. The Flyers were down 2-1. We were not confident that they were winning Game 4. We kind of expected them to be down 3-1, which is where they kind of ended up. So I can't really say that I'm surprised that we're sitting here today talking about a Flyers loss. Certainly didn't expect it to be a Game 7 loss.
Right. I think that's where we are.
Yeah, and quick recap. Obviously, again, if you're listening to this, you probably know what happened. But the Flyers managed to come back and win Games 5 and 6 in overtime, Game 6 being in double overtime, to force a Game 7 on Saturday evening. And unfortunately, the team came out kind of flat in Game 7. And there's a lot of reasons that that's kind of the case. And we'll go into that as we move along here. But the team didn't – the Philadelphia Flyers team that showed up in Games 5 and Game 6 was nowhere to be found in Game 7 for the most part. Would you say that's fair?
It's fair. And, I mean, I think there was almost a false sense of hope with not from the results of Games 5 and 6, but from the
process.
Well, not even that, but Sean Couturier gets hurt in Game 5, doesn't play the rest of Game 5, they win. Then he doesn't play at all in Game 6, and I think even in your mind then you're going, all right, the top forward's out, it's over.
We're in trouble here, right?
And they find a way to win that too. And I'll be honest, here's something that I can state for fact. I went on the air on Friday on 97.3, and I got to ask the question, how did they win that game? How did they win Game 6? And there was an answer, and I got to the answer, but my initial reaction, I gave an honest thought for my initial reaction, which is, I don't know how they won that game. I really don't know how they managed to get outshot 53-31. At one point in time, 50-20.
Oh, we'll talk about the Flyers getting outshot. Don't you worry about it. That'll come up.
I don't know how they won that game. And then obviously the real answer is goaltending.
Yeah.
You had a goalie who did not let in a shot for the last essentially full game, right? I mean, almost. It was the third period.
Probably close to
overtime.
60 minutes.
He went 55 minutes without giving up a goal. That's how they won the game. You literally needed perfection in the third and nothing in overtime because your season was on the line, and you got it.
And Carter Hart gave it to you.
That's how they won Game 6. But I think there was a false sense of hope when it was, oh, look, Sean Couturier is going to play Game 7. He must be good enough to go. And I had said it from the end of Game 5. When he didn't come back for Game 5, I said ahead of Game 6, if he's good enough, he'll play. He'll find a way to play.
And I told you that he was going to play almost no matter what.
When they won Game 6,
I had a feeling Sean Couturier was playing Game 7 just about no matter what. When they showed him during Game 6 on the broadcast, they showed him in the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw that he didn't have crutches next to him, his leg wasn't being straightened, like he wasn't under lock and key, I looked at him and thought, he's playing Game 7. It doesn't matter. He'll play. Right. If his ACL is torn, he'll play Game 7 at this point. I don't know if that's the case, and I'm sure we'll probably get some of that today.
He directly said after the game was over, and I understand if people may have missed it because when
I missed a lot of this.
Let's put it this way. Either you hit it off as soon as the handshakes were happening, or you had already tuned out after the second because you already knew.
I tuned out the second we hit zeros.
Okay.
And that's fair. I had to sit here and watch the whole game because I'm a fan and I do this podcast and I want to watch the whole game. Second it hit zeros, I flipped over to the UFC fight and watched Alistair Overeem knock out.
And look, in fairness for me, I basically watched the game the same way I watch every game. Until there was 10 minutes left in the third, and when it was still 3-0 with 10 minutes left in the third, I stopped paying attention to every detail of the game.
You started getting ready for media prep.
And not even that. I'm going to get a head start in writing it because I feel like, let's put it this way. I'm guilty as charged of, I forget what game it was. Game 5, I think. It would have to be game 5 because there was 5 minutes left in the game and it was 3-1.
Right.
So I had everything done.
I'm sure
I
you
had
did.
the recap written.
Yep.
Figuring, get ready to hit the button. Here they were. They showed up and they won a game 3-1. And then it was delete, and redo. Well, not a lot of it because most of the initial article is just summary. But I had, enough. Like, I guess what? I did it for game 6 too because I think I had halfway through game 6. I had the takeaways ready. I had at least the subject line with no content.
Turns out it wasn't actually halfway through the game. You thought it was, but it turns out there's 4 more periods to go.
Well, exactly. I did it through 2 periods because when they got scored on, when Barzil scored the goal with 30 seconds left or whatever it was.
Oh, that was a heartbreaker. Yeah, we talking about game 6 on Thursday. Flyers are up 2-0. Matthew Barzil scores with 30 seconds left in the second period to make that a game, right?
A period the Flyers got outscored in 3-1, by the way. So they'd already given up a goal late in the first, and then they gave up 2 unanswered or 2 in a row to the Islanders to start the second period. Right. Really early, by the way. I mean, it was 3 minutes into the period, and
they responded very quickly. Right.
I mean, that was a run of about 8 minutes of game time where they just completely handled you, and part of it had to do with a failed challenge that gave them a power play. That's another one.
Well, that's actually also something we have to talk about on this show for sure.
Well, sure, it all falls into line, but.
I think, and by the way, I do think next week is going to be a little bit more of a postmortem on the season, right? Once we have a little bit of distance and we can kind of sit back and look at this whole thing and blah, blah, blah. Today might be a little bit doom and gloom because, again, we're 12 hours out of game 7 and we're all still kind of, I think next week is when we can do a little bit more of a postseason wrap, right? And we'll give out some awards for a postseason.
With maybe a little bit more context and with maybe a little bit more reason, I'll call it for sure. I mean, there's things that I'm looking at that I like. I'm already on that schedule, so to speak.
Right. I want to see the full injury list.
Well, right? I do want to see the full injury list, and that's the thing. I don't want this show to be the complete postmortem of this year's team. I do want to already start thinking about what they need, so to speak, because I think that was easy to identify. That's easier to identify than why they didn't show up for game 7.
I agree.
That's the thing. And here's the thing too, because you're right. Last week's show, we kind of doomed and gloomed it. We didn't even know at the time of recording.
So.
Well, and at the time of recording, we didn't truly know the result of game 4. We kind of just made an assumption. Turned out to be right.
Turned out to be correct.
And then to be quite honest, here's the thing about this series. At 3-1, I don't know about you, but for me, I already accepted the result on Sunday night.
Now, so you know the answer because you're in the group text, and you know that I didn't have it. I believed all along. I believed until there were about 6 minutes left in game 7.
Now, hold on. Because, no, look, my series prediction at the beginning of all this was Flyers in 7.
Yeah.
So I knew it wasn't going to be a cakewalk of a series, but when it was 3-1, and I'm not saying because I don't watch game 5 differently. I'll say that. It's mentally, I'm preparing myself, and I already had the ideas in place that, all right, Tuesday night, game 5, assuming that they lose this game. And I didn't assume it ahead of time, but I'm going, assuming they lose this game, I'm mentally preparing for it. The Islanders just look more poised. They look more prepared. They look like the better flat-out team, straight up.
Can't really argue with that.
And I'm prepared for that to be the result, for it to be a 4-1 series.
And they're going to give Tampa a hell of a fight.
And look, I'll mention my comments in the group text later too about them going when we look forward, to what comes from this. Absolutely. I guess with what's left with hockey. But game 5, you've already prepared yourself mentally for it, like in your head. If it were to end tonight, because it's only going to take one, and it might take one mistake to do that. It might take one mistake, and that might be the game. If that's where it is, then you kind of start to accept that, knowing that it's only one game. Like you're one loss away from it being over. So you start to accept it.
Yep.
And then they win.
Of course.
And you start to get your hopes up. And then when they won game 6 the way they did, you're really pushing for that side. It was a game 5 was that teasing moment. And basically in your head, no, and here's the thing, in your head, you're going, why'd you tease me like that? Because now if you lose game 6, it's going to suck.
It just hurts.
You know,
right?
it really is. But when they won game 6, at least, you know, that's the thing about game 7. And I kind of had this feeling, and obviously I know a lot of people out there, and we even said, we're not going to, you know, it's going to be easier to look at the broad spectrum of the season later. And I already started to.
Yeah,
I wrote an article
have
on
to
it.
Get a little perspective on it.
But listen, here's where I'm at with this. I kind of had this thought midway through the day yesterday, as before game 7 happens, that I go, you know what? Partially, given where we were 6 days ago, this game is gravy. This whole thing is gravy because of the fact that they didn't, you know, did you think they would be there on Sunday? Well, no, probably not. And if you didn't, then to my view, they exceeded everyone's expectations.
I'm even going to take it one step further. And again, this is probably something for next week when we have a little bit more perspective and a little more time on the season.
Right.
I'm grateful that they got as far as they did. I'm grateful that they played playoff hockey at all. Right. If you had told me 5 months ago, if you had told me in the first week of April that the playoffs were going to happen and the Flyers were going to make the game 7 of the second round, most Flyers fans here would have been like, yeah, I'm cool with that. That sounds great.
Exactly.
So, and again, this might be better suited next week when we have a little more time on it and when we've all kind of recovered a little bit. And maybe next week I'll really try to get a bunch of people on the show and we'll do a good postmortem for the 2019-2020 Flyers because I do think they deserve it. You know, this was a team that was top 5 in the league, you know, for a large chunk of the season towards the end here. And, you know, we heard all the stuff about hottest team in the league after November and whatever metrics you want to use. The Philadelphia Flyers have earned a celebration of some variety. And I think next week that show should be a little bit of a party.
Right. And a little bit and combined with mixing of ideas. I mean,
for sure.
Look, the two of us can sit here and go back and forth and we might have some of the same ideas and we might have different ideas, but ultimately it's two of us talking about it as opposed to multiple voices who are able to sit there and say, this is what I think they need. Because let's put it this way, someone in the group is going to be the person who says trade blank or do this or find a way to get rid of this.
Okay, you don't have to say somebody. You can just say that it's going to be Mike.
Well, I'm not going there. I saw it all over Twitter too. And
right.
But here's the thing I like about doing this show. I like doing it with you for this reason because you just set me up perfectly for the article I have ready to go that'll be out after we record this. So by the time you're listening
by the time the show goes live, you'll be able to find that article on 97.3 ESPN and also at sportstalkphilly.com.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, where you can also find our podcast, by the way, as well as on Twitter at YWT Podcast.
So
they're behind Kevin on the board if you're watching on YouTube.
So here's where we're at with this. The reason it's so disappointing this time around, in particular, more than anything, is because kind of like what you just said, we got playoffs when we didn't expect playoffs, quite honestly. Like, I'll try to, like, I don't love to read stuff verbatim, but I honestly will at one point in time because it makes enough sense. You know, I even said the funny thing about this particular, like, it's a year of progress. We have to acknowledge it's a year of progress. When you look at the guys who played,
the roles that they played.
Well, the roles they played.
The role Joel Farabee played this season.
My answer to it is this. Okay, this was your first full year of Chuck Fletcher. Your first full chance to see you had control of the offseason. You had the ability to make in-season trades. You had the ability to call up guys whenever you felt necessary. Yep. You were the one running the ship for the first time. We're not in a role where, hey, I just got hired in December and now I'm trying to get a feel for things before I make anything drastic. This was your first full year.
Give Chuck Fletcher a little bit of credit. We look at the Derek Grant trade. I think everyone was pretty happy with that for the regular season, and you know he played okay in the playoffs, but generally speaking,
he had a rough series. I'll say that much. I thought he was good for some parts of it, but for some parts of the playoffs. I mean, but this series was rough, and by the time Game 7 rolled around and he wasn't playing, it made a lot of sense.
Yeah, but it's also I think the deal was good, and I think getting Grant was good. He was good for the regular season. He was good in the play-ins, and it's hard to give Chuck Fletcher a hard time because the guy he traded for at the deadline played poorly after 5 months off. You know what I mean? He gets a little bit of a pass on Grant's poor play in the second round.
Let's put it this way. Here's another thought for you too. They go out and they got Derek Grant and they got Nate Thompson. And I know those two guys on expiring contracts, people I'm sure are thrilled they don't have to deal with another Nate Thompson game. Like,
I'm
I
glad
get it.
Nate Thompson's
I know,
gone.
but here's where I'm like, just for perspective, you could go out and have gotten JG Pajot if you really wanted him. But who were you willing to trade to get him? At the end of the day, you gave up a 4th-round pick and a lifelong minor leaguer to get Grant, and you gave up a 5th-round pick to get Thompson. And that was what you were willing to part ways with. The Islanders don't have a 1st-round pick.
Right. And their eggs were in the basket.
And in fairness, it might win them a Stanley Cup. But
it very well might.
And that's the choice
there
you
it
make.
is. You just said it, by the way. We talked a little bit about the show, and we briefly touched on the New York Islanders Tampa Bay series. You want to touch on that for a second? Because I feel like you have some takes on that.
I'll finish. Let me finish the thought I had before about why it sucks today and stuff like that, and then I will tell you where I was at with the Islanders in a moment. So, like I said, we have to acknowledge it's a year of progress, right? We have to, but there's a different feeling this particular year, and the reason is because this team was rolling in March. We were thrilled watching it. We were having a blast doing it. And then the world stopped. Literally, the entire world stopped. Not only did we not have hockey, we didn't have any sport. We didn't have the ability to go. And I wrote it in this way. We didn't have the ability to go out to dinner. We weren't hanging out with people. You were literally staying home all the time. And it shook up everything that we know and love about everything. Sure. And then this is, what's hard about it is that the focus was strictly on, because of where the NHL was, and the NBA is doing it too, find a way to end this season. Find a way to award the Stanley Cup for the 2019-2020 season and get it done.
Award the Stanley Cup.
Right.
Yep, that was the goal.
And here's the thing. The NHL did their part. They stepped up in this role. They gave you
and it certainly looks like they're going to.
They gave you an agenda.
Yeah. As we condense down to one bubble with 0 positive cases, the entire Toronto bubble, and seems like they're going to do their job here.
And they found a way to say, here's the 12 teams in the Eastern, and they did it in a sense too, where it was so far along in the season that they said, here's 12 teams we think could have made it.
Yep.
For better or worse, and here's 12
teams that we need to sell market shares for in Montreal and Chicago.
I mean, kind of, but at the same time, it worked out, because let's put it this way, those teams won and got to past the qualifiers for a reason. But
maximum
all that aside, you take those 12 teams, you put them in one spot, and you say, go at it, right? And they did that. And my answer is, for the last 4 or 5 weeks that we've been watching, we've actually talked about real Flyers hockey, right?
Yeah. And that's something we didn't necessarily know we were going to be doing in May.
And
June,
my
July.
thing is that I'm like, things have felt normal. There've been games on every single day, even if they're not Flyers games. There's been hockey and there's been Flyers hockey. Yep. And that they did what they set out to do. And, they're going to find a way to award the Stanley Cup. We know this because the bubbles have worked.
I will not tip my hat to the NHL for much, because they make a lot of poor decisions.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
But they have managed to pull this off. And I don't quite know how, but they've done it.
You mean like somehow or other finding a way to, after a 7-game playoff series, expect the team to hop a plane and go to another city and play in 48 hours?
2 days, I know, with a 3-hour time difference, by the way.
Right.
But either way, okay, so now that we've finished giving the NHL enough props.
Well, I gave the NHL props, so here's why it hurts more for a Flyers perspective. Look, the end of the season is the end of the season because guess what? 15 other teams in normal circumstances feel the exact same way the day after it's over. Yep. It happens, and only one team gets to win. It's the hardest trophy to win in all of sports. That's what they tell you, and it's the truth in my opinion. It's the hardest to win.
I agree.
And there's nothing wrong this particular year with the results. In a normal year, you make the playoffs. This year, they would have made the playoffs comfortably. We know that.
Comfortably, yeah.
And
there's a real chance they would have won the division the way they were playing.
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
And I don't see any reason to believe they wouldn't have found a way to win in the first round. And let's just take it for what it is. We don't know if it would have happened that way in normal circumstances. Let's take it for the way they had to do it. They won in the first round. They won a playoff series for the first time in 8 years.
2012. Yep.
That's a huge accomplishment, especially for like I said, first full year of Chuck Fletcher, first year of Alain Vigneault, first full year of Carter Hart, first playoff experience for a lot of guys, and guys who also had nothing more than a 5 or 6 game series against a team that everybody knew was miles above them
Right. Now,
2 years ago.
I do actually want to take that point right there
Okay.
because a lot of people gave Travis Konechny a hard time through this series for his lack of production. And they
Hmm.
pointed to his shiny new contract and said, here you go. You're getting paid like this.
Hmm.
Play like it. And I don't think that's unfair. I think Travis Konechny failed to produce. And I
Hmm.
don't think that can be overstated. I will, however, say that I'm willing, personally myself, I'm willing to give Travis Konechny a little bit of a pass here because in my head, this is his first real playoff experience. You look at that Pittsburgh series a couple years ago, and he was playing kind of sheltered minutes, and he wasn't really playing a ton, and they were not a good team. They should not have been anywhere near that series. That's not a real playoff series. That's you getting dumpstered for 6 games, and then you just happen to win a couple of them.
And here's the thing that I'll mention about that too. This is why I mentioned they made the playoffs comfortably. I'm not talking about these years where they made the playoffs on the last day of the season and fell ass backwards fell ass backwards into the 3rd seed because other teams were already in and said we're resting our guys
Oh
tonight.
my
Last
God!
game
I
of the
think it
regular
was
season,
Columbus and New
like
Jersey,
Columbus
both,
and right, like
both rested.
anybody else remember that year everybody else decided we're taking the night off and the Flyers had to win a game to get in. So not only did they win that game, but it vaulted them 3 spots in the playoffs. So they got Pittsburgh on the road.
Yep.
Essentially, like that was,
Yeah.
That's how it works.
When you're scratching and clawing for playoff spots, you'll take whatever you can get, even
and
if it is Pittsburgh on the road in the middle of their Stanley Cup runs.
And that's the way that the playoffs greeted the careers of Ivan Provorov and Travis Konechny and Travis Sanheim.
Yep.
Here it is for you. On a silver platter, you get the best player in the world.
Was that also
circles around you?
Did Robert Hagg play in that series? Was that his
probably a little, but
too?
I don't think he played as much. Like I don't know. Like he was definitely a guy who I think only came in like.
and let's put this 6'7", yeah.
And I had this thought after the series there because they gave us Sean Couturier, and by the way, so Sean Couturier said he had a sprained MCL just like he had 2 years ago. By the way, so he played Game 7 with roughly the same injury. Although I think a little bit not.
Well, he didn't have a hat trick this time, so trade him. Obviously, that's how this works.
I don't think he was hurt to the same extent. Like he just said, it's the same. I think it's the same location. Like, hey,
it can't be the same severity. There's no way.
He said sprained. I thought last time he'd flat out torn it.
Did he?
Okay. I thought last time it was straight up just he tore his MCL.
Man, he was an animal in that
somehow
series.
Played and then played a charity game over the summer and re-aggravated the injury to an extent, and that's why we're calling it the same injury maybe.
Okay.
He sprained it weeks before training camp and literally almost couldn't go at the start of the season.
Yeah,
that made it look worse. I mean, so there's a thing about, I get it. And I get where Flyers fans come from. You're tired of hearing there's always next year. But when your team is as young as they are, and I get it, there's veterans on this team too that don't deserve as much of a pass. We'll get to them. I'm talking strictly about the Travis Konechnys, the Ivan Provorovs. I wanted so badly to see Ivan Provorov on that screen during media availability last night, by the way, because all I could think about was the way it was two years ago
when he was sobbing at that podium, talking about he could have done
when
more.
He had nothing. And again, for the guy to play 38 minutes and 15 seconds in Game 6
and score the winner,
game-winning goal, then in Game 7 block a shot almost directly off his kneecap, go down,
ugly,
not move, get up, and then skate to the bench and then not miss a shift.
I'm surprised that they had to blow the whistle for him just because he's such an animal.
Right.
But yeah.
I mean, and was anybody really surprised when he came back out immediately? Like,
no.
Don't go to the tunnel. I'm not going up to the locker room.
He wasn't missing any sort of time.
And he doesn't do that. And I would have loved to have seen it. And quite honestly, I'd love to have seen the room, because the one thing that I know about hockey locker rooms is that they don't stay exactly the same from one year to the next. Somebody isn't going to be there next year that was there. And it might be as simple as saying, like what we already said,
right?
Yeah, you probably seen the last in Nate Thompson and
Well, I was gonna actually, after this, I want to go through these. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So the hard part with, and I tweeted something like this after Sunday, in the event that Monday was, or the event that Tuesday was it. And it's the hard part of there's always next year, or take the progress and it's going to be better next year, is when you don't know when next year is. And we don't know when next year is yet because of this whole situation. So it'd be easy to sit here and say in May, the first weekend of May, because let's just this is the weirdness of 2020. the Kentucky Derby was on before the Flyers played a Game 7 in the second round, which everything about that sentence is normal until
That
you tell
happened in
everybody
September.
until you tell everybody it happened in September on
Yeah.
Labor Day weekend.
Yeah.
You know, like that's the weird part. That being said, if it's May and the season ends and that's where it was over, then everybody moves along and says, when's September blank? When does training camp start? So we can go for the next one.
Right. When's
when
the
do we get
draft?
to
When's
see
free agency?
When do we get to,
right.
and even when's the draft and when's free agency? People know that's coming in a month. You know,
Right.
people know that part's happening. The draft is already laid out. We know the lottery situation. The Flyers are going to have the 23rd overall pick, by the way.
Yep.
Which in this draft, someone's going to be there.
There's
Trust
a very
me,
real
someone's
chance
gonna
that
be
that's
there.
a good pick. This is a deep draft. We've heard it all along that this draft is 20 to 25 deep in terms of good players in the first round.
And it's not, you know,
It's
people
not
who are going to be
studs, it's not
earth-shattering.
game
It's not
changers.
exactly. It's not going to be, you
Guys
know, there's
who are
one guy
expected
and
to eventually contribute at the NHL level.
well, and let's put it this way. There's one guy, then there's probably 3 or 4 who round out the top 5 who you go watch them, they'll be good. And
Yep.
then there's
Some of them are going into the division.
and then
Yep.
there's 20 more who are going to be able to contribute in some way down the road.
Yep.
I mean, and it makes a lot. Yeah. So, but that's the hardest part is you didn't want to see the run end because you just don't know when the next game is going to be. And,
Right.
And you figure like
There's that
it's
void in
really
front
hard-
of you.
it's
I don't
really
know
hard
when the
to-
next Flyers game is going to be.
it's really hard to focus on there will be a next season at some point when you don't know when it is and when it feels like this was like it makes people feel like this was the one shot.
Yeah,
And now you let that shot get away to a team that on paper a lot of people don't give enough credit to.
Real quick, would the Flyers have been better off if they went 1-2 in the round robin and ended up as the 3 seed, just in terms of expectations? Because I feel like Philadelphia kind of started rallying around the Flyers, but I feel like when that happened after the Sixers got swept, by the way, I feel like that happened and everyone jumped on the bandwagon, and we love that, and we're not against that. We've taken a very strong pro bandwagon stance on this show. I feel like a lot of people, when they jumped on the bandwagon, looked at that little 1 next to the Flyers logo and developed all these expectations. Is sports radio and the average casual bandwagon fans, are they as disappointed if the 3-seeded Islanders lose to the 3-seeded Flyers lose to the 7-seeded Islanders?
I don't know. I mean, here's
what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying. Now, here's I'm going to kind of throw some water on that a little bit because you're hitting on a point I do want to get to because I 1,000% think that that's valid.
Okay.
That this feeling's valid. Your question was, do the 3-seeded Islanders have just as good of do things go differently for the 3-seed?
Well, I know the bracket shakes out differently, but I'm talking about if we ended up here and they just happened to be the 3 seed.
Well, because my answer was going to be the 3-seeded Flyers then would have lost in the first round to the 6-seed Islanders instead of the second round. You know,
well, that's what I'm saying.
That's about it. I mean, the Islanders are built for this moment right now, kind of, and that's the hard. I mean, let's just Washington played a lot of that series without Nick Backstrom. And I still don't think it made a difference. You know, I really don't think that made any difference whatsoever. I just think that was a team of a lot of talented players, including a guy who knows how to score and did in that series, by the way. Like, Ovechkin wasn't quiet.
Right. No,
but
the New York Islanders are just built for the playoffs.
They're built for right now, and I think that they're still – look, I don't doubt what Alain Vigneault said. Everybody's hurt in some way.
Right. Oh, of course.
It's a different animal, but at the same time – I think if there was any team out there that played a qualifying round series that didn't take a hell of a lot out of them, it was the New York Islanders against Florida.
Yep.
And then they played a Washington team that came back and did not look prepared or ready or, quite frankly, all that interested in that first round series. And that's why, give the Flyers credit for those last 2 games that they won because I think that they pushed this team to the brink off of sheer will.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that the more talented team and the better team still ended up winning the series. But I do think, like to your point about the 3-seed thing, or if they weren't the 1 seed, I fully believe that if they would have come back and would have won 1 of those games, 2 of those games, take your pick, they come out as the 2, the 3, they stay the 4, whatever it may be. I think we're going to be way more critical of the first round at that point in time, because if they don't win the first round, I think we're still critical. But I do think that getting the first seed made everybody sit there and go, it's conference finals or bust.
It changed the expectations.
The expectations skyrocketed, quite frankly. I think that
Right.
at that point in time, everybody thought that this team should be playing. And we'll get into, like I said, we're going to get into the Islanders a little more down the road. But I had this kind of thought going into this series that the team that wins this series is the one that's going to the Cup final for the Eastern Conference. So I fully believe that the Islanders are the team that's going to be there, because I think that someone was going to come out of the series battle tested and ready to go for whatever was the rest of the way.
For sure.
And they've been battle tested and they're ready to go. And I think that I know that people don't think the Islanders are going to look like they've showed up in game one when they have to play another game 48 hours after that. But I'm telling you, they're going to be ready. And people think that Tampa is poised to win it this year because they look like that team. They look like this is their time. And I understand
and people have been saying that for 3 years about Tampa. Right.
And I understand that. And I also understand that Tampa has a lot of talent, and it's not, Tampa has much more speed, much more scoring ability than the Flyers do.
And they still have Steven Stamkos waiting in the wings.
All things that are true.
Yep.
The Islanders are giving me Team of Destiny vibes.
I do not disagree with that. And I'm not quite as confident about it as you are, because you seem like you're pretty like the Islanders are going to the Cup final and you're kind of locked in on that. I'm not necessarily there, just because Tampa does have so much talent.
They have,
but I could see it happening for sure.
But I think Tampa. See, here's the thing: just like the Flyers, I think Tampa hasn't played a team like this yet. Tampa's played teams that I don't know that, and I don't want to say Boston was never interested. I don't want to say that, but here's the thing about Boston: Halak gave him a better shot in goal.
Yep,
obviously, and then. Do we know if David Pastrnak was ever healthy in return? He was unfit to play for half of the round robin. And then, do we know if he was completely good to go? And at the end of the day, who else was even good to go?
Right. How much of that team was hurt?
Who was healthy and ready to go and came back, or just came back from a 4-month pause and actually looked like they hadn't taken a 4-month pause.
Right. Zdeno Chara is 44 years old. Right. It's hard to get up and go.
And that again is the single worst part of the number one seed thing is you came back in and you won the first 3 games and won them outscoring opponents 11-3.
Yep.
You didn't just win games. If they would have won 2 of the 3 games going to overtime, shootouts, whatever it took to get there, then I think everybody curbs the expectations and goes, it's cool.
They'll do what they can.
They won games. We're excited, but we're excited the way we were after game 6, where it was, wow, what a game, what a thriller. It took everything we had. That's the way you feel, right? Instead, that was, whoa, total domination of Boston, Washington, and Tampa Bay. This team looks ready to go.
This team looks like they're about to win the Cup. Right.
Right. And you hit a team that had a different style. That, by the way, that you hadn't played. I mean, well, you lost to them in January, but you hadn't, and that was the last time you played them, and took you to overtime twice in the regular season for wins, before you ended up winning those games, because they have an all-world goaltender.
Yeah.
And they met you with a style that you hadn't seen in a long time. Not a lot of teams play the style the Islanders play, and then the style that the Canadians had when you played them in the first round.
Yeah.
Not a lot of teams play that way. And at the end of the day, I know that people are going to sit there and turn around and go, oh my God, that was one of the most boring game 7s that there was out there collectively, just because,
from a Flyers fan perspective, it certainly was.
But people are going to say it from a hockey perspective because it was 2-0. And I think everybody already knew then
because it's the Islanders.
Because it's the Islanders.
Steve Dangle said it on the podcast. It's funny how he gets notifications and goes, oh, the Islanders are up 1-0. That game's over, and puts his phone down.
Right.
Because when the Islanders score, that game ends.
There was a good article, and it's Sports Illustrated crosses with the hockey news, I believe is what it is. And they even said the Islanders played this game 7 to their identity, but also after this series, as everything has gone on, they're also the highest scoring team on average remaining in the playoffs. So think about that for a minute too. And I mean, maybe that's different if the Vegas Vancouver series goes a little differently than certainly it did, because at the end of the day, it took, Vegas won a game 7, 3-0 with 2 empty net goals, and didn't score in game 6 and scored 1 goal in game 5, I think is what it was, or something like that. Like, it was obviously there was something to be said for the way that series ended, but I mean, let's put it this way. I'm not alone in feeling the way I do about the Islanders. I know that.
No, for sure. They're a good team, and they could very easily win the Stanley Cup. That's not unreasonable at all.
I heard that on SportsCenter, Barry Melrose picked the exact matchup I haven't for the Stanley Cup final.
Okay. Out of these four teams?
Out of these four teams, pick the exact matchup. And I already gave away one, obviously, because I think the Islanders are winning this next series.
All right, well, hit me with it. Who's the other?
Vegas.
Oh, okay. You got Vegas over Dallas, huh?
I got Vegas in 6, but I think, but
at this stage, every series is going to be good. There is no easy matchup in the conference finals.
Do I feel good about any of this? Not really, because I went 2-2 in the last round, and I only got one.
Nobody got more than 3 or 4 right in the first round.
I only got one series.
You're lying.
I only got in the first round?
Something like that, yeah.
Qualifying round, I went 3-5. First round, I went 4-4, and I don't think I ever got a series length right. This particular round, I got one series length right and still picked the wrong team.
Remember how before these playoffs started, everybody said they're going to be hard to pick because everyone's coming in fresh? Well, guess what? They're hard to pick because everyone's coming in fresh.
Right.
I mean, I do actually, before we, kind of work our way back here, I do want to look at the Flyer future a little bit.
Sure.
I'm looking at capfriendly.com.
Yeah.
I'm going to go through the Flyers that are expiring this year. And I want you to tell me real quick. Let them walk, re-sign them, or trade them if they're in we'll just have a conversation about all these guys.
Yeah, I feel like we started this a little bit last week already.
We did. And that's why I wanted to do it this week, because we touched on it last week, but now we're really here.
Yeah. I have it up in front of me too, and okay. I want to touch on something else with this list too,
okay,
because there's guys on here that we need to talk about.
Yes, there is. I'm going to start top down here. Nate Thompson has to be gone, right?
I almost tweeted out during the game. At the very least, you're watching Nate Thompson's last game as a Flyer.
Okay, so if
he's gone, this team, at the end of the day, look, you make the trade for Nate Thompson for one reason and one reason only, because veteran presence in the playoffs does matter for a lot of teams.
And we talked a lot about the Flyers having 14, 15, 16 forwards who are ready to go, and having Nate Thompson available is part of that.
Right.
He was part of the depth of this team, and that's great.
Now, because we are using cap friendly, I want to say the number is skewed here a little bit for something, and that is, yes, like we know it's a flat cap, and that goes into, by the way, that goes into the decision for Nate Thompson, because you don't have room to re-sign even to $1 million contract for 1 year. You don't have room to sign a guy who's 35 going on 36 to a 1 year, $1 million deal in a flat cap. You just don't.
No, you don't.
But the number, like, especially when you already have over $48 million committed to your other forwards. Now, that being said, I know
especially when you have the guys in Lehigh Valley who can come up and take the spot.
Correct. And I know that the number, like if you look at the number this year to next year already, and you're going, whoa, how come only $1 million comes off the books? It's because you already started some of your work. Because
yes,
Oscar Lindblom was making less than $1 million this year and signed a 3-year, $3 million per year contract. Yep. So you did some of your work. You brought back a guy who you knew you were going to have to re-sign. Some of the work is already done.
And the fact that he got in and played, by the way, because that happened, is Oscar Lindblom returned and played Game 6, and we completely buried that lead here on the show.
Yeah.
Oscar Lindblom returned and played Game 6 of this series.
And quite frankly, looked good in both games.
Not spectacular. A little rusty in Game 6, and I get it.
And in Game 7, I get it that most of the team didn't show. If you're going to complain about that guy 2 games into a return from cancer, then just, please walk away from
And also, he probably was a top 3 or 4 forward for the Flyers. In a game where nobody produced, he looked good.
He made a play, and it was the best scoring chance they had, and it was the only scoring chance that they had where you sat there and you said it had to happen. It was late second period, I believe.
Okay.
Kevin Hayes got a breakaway.
And we're talking about getting back in that game.
Right. Because it's 3-0. You had a shot to get that. Let's put it this way. If they would have won the game, and we're here talking about conference finals and erasing a 3-1 deficit, then the quote "put your big boy pants on" would have become Alain Vigneault's equivalent to Peter Laviolette's "we need 1 goal before in the next 5 minutes" timeout. Yes, you know what I mean? It would have become the equivalent. And if that thought didn't cross your mind late second period, if they just got 1, it might make people think. And that was the shot for the 1, in my opinion. Yep. It was only the 3rd shot of the period at that point in time. And yes, that's a problem. But that being said, And I didn't even realize that was who set it up, by the way, that it was Oscar Lindblom who made a little bit of a saucer pass there, got it to him.
A gorgeous pass.
And was made. And by the way, in his second game back in 9 freaking months after battling cancer, made a play that looked completely normal for him.
Yep. And you know what? Regardless of the loss last night,
he's a winner.
Flyers got to win in this series, and that's all that matters.
He is a winner. He is
but you're talking about this in terms of cap. The next 3 years, and we know that the cap is staying relatively flat for the next 3 years, Oscar Lindblom might score 30 goals, making $3 million a season.
Yeah, and look, is it going to happen next year? I don't know, but
Probably
we don't know when next year. But we don't know when next year is, so don't hold anything against him. 2 years from now, if he's back to where he was,
back to a relatively normal, roughly October to roughly April regular season.
Well, let's be real. You're battle tested. If you went through the cancer battle and came back, you're battle tested already.
I'm sorry, and also a cancer battle during a pandemic. By the way,
exactly. Want to continue down this list?
Yeah. So the next name we have is Tyler.
This is interesting. Yeah,
and this one's super duper interesting for me. So he made $1 million this season. And if I could sign him for the next 4 years at $1 million, I would do it today. The problem is he might not be that cheap.
Well, let's say 4 years at $1 million is not going to happen.
Yeah, right. You might be able to get him for 2 years.
I would sign him for a 1 or 2 year deal.
Yep.
And I have to hope that I don't go over 1.5 mil.
Yeah.
He's got to get a raise of some kind, but I got to hope that he doesn't go over 1.5 mil.
In a world where the cap stays flat for the next couple of years, I think Tyler Pitlick's going to get boned. If the cap was continuing upwards as normal and the cap this year was going to be 84, next year was going to be 88, blah, 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 Tyler Pitlick might get like 4x2. 4 years, $2 million per, something like that.
And look,
from some team, maybe not the Flyers, but from some team.
Free agency is going to suck this year. It's already given. It's going to suck this year. And if I'm Tyler Pitlick and I really enjoyed playing with this team and I think that I'm going somewhere with this team.
And you think that this team is going somewhere?
Let's put it this way. Something to remember, his former team is in the conference finals.
Yeah.
You know, a team that traded him away is now playing in the conference finals, and he's not. But was that expected?
He also wasn't really getting the opportunities.
That's the other thing, too. He might – let's say this way. Is he playing in that Game 7, or is a guy we've never heard of before who scores a hat trick playing in Game 7?
Jeez.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and that story
if you're not the guy getting into the lineup, even if the team makes the conference finals, you're looking for the opportunity to still play. So I think
exactly.
He was never pulled out of the lineup for any – I mean, I don't think – was he ever pulled out as a healthy scratch?
I'm not sure.
Early on, maybe. Early on
28 years old, right? He wasn't benched for, maintenance day reasons. He's not old.
No, and for the last 3 games, bar none, probably the best player with the most speed, in my opinion.
He was throughout both playoff series, he might have been the most consistent Flyer.
Quite honestly, yeah. And he's exactly the type of player that, to me,
he knows his role.
But fits the mold of exactly what you needed to counter the Islanders' bottom 6. Same style player who goes in with some energy. He needs other guys like that around him. He's not the guy I get rid of.
I agree. So I would love for the Philadelphia Flyers to bring Tyler Pitlick back. I don't know if it's going to make sense.
To me, the only way he doesn't come back is if it does not fit the cap.
Right. If someone's willing to give him $2 million to go play next season, great. And I wish him well. It probably won't be in Philadelphia.
Right.
Moving along. But if you can get him back, I love Tyler Pitlick and would love for him to continue being a Philadelphia Flyer. I do love him.
We're going to go through the rest of this list. There's not much that we're going to be able to say about a lot of these guys. That's the one. That's the guy who I think you got to find a way.
Yep. Derek Grant made $700K this year. Obviously came over in a trade with the Anaheim Ducks. He is a UFA at the end of this year. We talked about this a little bit earlier when we talked about Chuck Fletcher and the Derek Grant trade and bringing him in. He looked pretty poor in the second round. I think he looked good when you had him in the regular season. He looked pretty decent through the round robin games. I think that's probably Morgan Frost's spot next year.
I don't disagree with. I don't disagree that it's somebody else's spot. That's what I don't. That's what I don't disagree with.
I think Derek Grant gets pinched out here not because he's I don't think Derek Grant gets excluded here because he's bad. I think the team is just too good to squeeze a guy like Derek Grant in.
Here's the thing. Derek Grant, when he came over at the deadline, he played 7 games, a goal, 5 points.
Nothing
started off pretty well, and I get it. The team was rolling; it was really easy. And one of those 7 games, by the way, was the day after or the day of a red eye to Philadelphia, from Anaheim. So kind of hard to get your legs going after that.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, if he has mild production in the playoffs at all, and I say mild production in the sense of if you give me a goal or two and you gave me 5 points in 16 playoff games or whatever the number was by the end of it, I'm probably not
different conversation here.
I'm probably not complaining about it. And I say you're a fit for this bottom 6. You had no goals and 2 assists.
Yep.
And bottom 6 guys need, let's this way. Derek Brassard looked like he was shot out of a cannon in the last 3 games of this series or 2 games of the series when he came back in the lineup. That's the type of guy that I need to see for the Flyers, who not only has that energy but can produce. Grant just didn't look like he was all with it. And, Derek Grant's value, everybody loved Derek Grant in the Montreal series because he basically assumed the role of Carter Hart protector and pest.
Yep.
It was, I saw what you did, Nick Suzuki, and I'm going to make sure I let you know about it at the end of this game. Right. Series over, I'm letting you know about it. And it was funny, and it was great that he did it, but I just don't know if he's – but that was his moment, and I don't think there's anything else that keeps him here.
If we had 3 years of watching Derek Grant and we knew that he could produce and we had seen him consistently and blah, 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 then we might be looking at this a little differently. Mm-hmm. But us as fans, we saw him for 7 regular season games, 2 games a year with the Anaheim Ducks before that when you play them, 7 games with the team when he comes over, and then a pretty mediocre playoff run. What has he done in a Philadelphia Flyers jersey to earn a contract moving forward, especially because he's probably going to be looking for a raise from this $700K because, no NHL player wants to sit here and make $700K.
Well, and here's the thing. Another guy who is in his 30s now.
Yeah, he's 30 years old.
I don't think that there's room for guys like that unless you know they're going to fit a certain role or you've already locked up for those years of their career.
Right.
There's no reason to re-sign a guy and potentially raise his – and I get it. Look, Nate Thompson and Derek Grant are freeing up $1.7 million of cap space. It's not a lot. But then again, it's possibly the $1.7 million or whatever that you need that you may need to keep Tyler Pitlick at 28.
Yep.
And I know that doesn't help completely. You're going to probably this is where what you said about Morgan Frost comes into play. If Morgan Frost is on an entry-level contract making $750,000 a year or whatever it is, it's something close to that, I believe.
All right. And then
I'm sorry, $863,000. Okay, whatever. If that's what he's making, then that's what you open up the spot for, and you hope he grows and he continues to do it. And you hope that this run has helped him in some way from just being able to practice all that time.
Oh, for sure. For being in the bubble, being around the guys. Absolutely. Right. The last forward we have to talk about is another interesting case here. Nicholas Obey-Kubel made $700,000 this year. He is an RFA with arbitration rights this quote-unquote summer, this autumn, this whatever.
So
what does his next contract look like? Yeah, he's going to be back for sure, but
he's at $700,000 now.
We're probably looking at a bridge deal, 2 years, $1 million type deal.
It needs to be about $1 million. And again, I think it needs to fit the role. This is the guy who needs to get the Tyler Pitlick style contract. If Tyler Pitlick was under contract for 1 year at $1 million at 28, that's the kind of deal Nick Aube-Kubel needs at 24.
Yeah, we'll probably get 2 years or something like that.
And his value needs to increase the way Scott Lawton's increased.
Yeah.
Like, I need the numbers to go up before I feel like I can give you $2-3 million. Like, Oscar Lindblom got $3 million because he was on pace to score 30 goals this year.
He earned it, right?
And then put the team ahead of himself during a cancer battle and said, "I'll be back. Don't you worry about it."
Yep.
And went ahead and did what he did.
Yep.
And then, by the way, still managed to come back in the same season. He'll be back next year. We know it now.
Yep. So that's it for the forwards, and we will move to the defensemen. But I did want to mention real quick, that's it for the Flyers. Right now, this year expiring, you have Nate Thompson, Tyler Pitlick, Derek Grant, Nick Aube-Kubel. Next year, you have 2 very interesting names up. You have Scott Lawton and Michael Raffel. Scott Lawton will probably be looking for a raise from that 2.3. Michael Raffle, as of right now, will probably stay there or take a little bit of a pay cut depending on where the team's at. But I did just want to mention that kind of, looking even further forward, because when you sign contracts, you're not only worried about this year, but you're worried about the future. And that Scott Lawton number might end up going pretty high if he plays top 6 next year.
Watch those two names this offseason closely, because
a re-sign is going to be a big deal for Scott Lawton.
Not that. I'm not saying that offseason. I'm talking about.
Oh, you mean trade wise?
Yeah, I think you're going to hear their names, because if you and the reason I say this is because there are a number of players above it, and you're going to obviously need to keep somebody on this rod. Like, I know everybody's going to talk about James Van Riem's like the $7 million.
It's not moving.
No, it's not that it's not moving. You need to keep you need to keep a contract like that for one more year, so you have something to bribe Seattle with.
That's fair.
I need to get rid of it. Can you you take it? You need a team.
JVR will have to waive at that point, because I believe he'll have a no movement by then.
I don't see anything about one.
I'm sorry. That was Kevin Hayes. I'm sorry. Kevin Hayes has one for the first couple years.
Right.
For anti-Seattle
I don't
purposes.
think he's got a no move, so he's able to be dangled, and you're going to keep.
Yeah. I think JVR might be the name, or, I mean, depending on what happens to Shane Gostisbehere next year, but we'll get into that.
Okay, all right.
We are running a little short on time here.
I know, but you mentioned Gostisbehere, so this is the point I want to make.
Yeah.
A Lawton or a Raffle, and I think Lawton more likely than Raffle. It may be the name you have to dangle with
get rid of Gostisbehere.
With a Shane Gostisbehere to not only get rid of that contract, but to get something in return that may actually help you.
Right. Well, real quick, we will get into the defenseman. Justin Braun. How much of a pay cut does Justin Braun need to take to be a Philadelphia Flyer next year? Because he made $3.8 million this year.
At least $2 million.
Okay. And do you think he does it, or do you think he walks and goes somewhere else?
I think he walks, and
I agree.
I think he walks. I think that in some crazy world, Matt Niskanen's your veteran defenseman, obviously.
Yep.
And then
he's only got 1 year left.
And then, quite honestly, Robert Hagman might be your next best veteran defenseman. In terms of age.
I mean,
at 25 years,
he's only honestly, a year older than Sanheim, but I get what
right.
You're
but
saying.
Still, he might be the next oldest guy on the team. Honestly, no, and I'm talking about even in terms of so Braun walks. Who do you go and try to get? I wonder if they don't just because of the cap that they don't just try to go straight to Igor Zamula.
Do you think? They
I don't know if it's going to work, but
you think they dangle Niskanen if he's willing?
No,
to
because I still think you need somebody like that. And I mean, I'll go and I've looked up.
Quite frankly, from what I've seen, I think Ivan Provorov's ready to take that role at 23. And I know that sounds crazy, but I think he's ready to take the role of grizzled, veteran defenseman at 23 years old.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree, but I still think you need somebody else like that. You need 2 of those guys, and I think you need somebody else who balances out, like you wanted Braun to do. You need someone who balances out your top 4 even better.
Okay, that makes sense.
Braun's not that guy he's not going to be that guy for me. At this point, I just don't know who else you would turn to. I'm trying to look at some of the. I mean, you're going to need cheap here. Obviously, you're going to need somebody, and there's not a lot of appealing names out there per se. Who are making cheap money. I would say. You mean
the Flyers aren't going to be players in the Alex Pietrangelo sweepstakes?
I know everybody wants a guy like that, and I understand why, but you're not getting him.
No, you're not. And that was a joke, but
no, I know, and I mean, I don't know. Torrey Krug looks like a favorable name, but his contract is high, so
there's no way.
And he wants to cash in this. He clearly wants to cash in. He doesn't want a 1-year deal.
Well, here's the thing: we talked about the Flyers having 7 defensemen this year, right? And if Braun walks, you still have 6. You still have Provorov, Niskanen, Ghost, Sanheim, Hagmeyers.
I think they want to. I think if they're going to try to spend for a guy who replaces Braun, which you're going to probably have to do,
flip Gostisbehere,
then you need to get rid of Gostisbehere, and you need to find a way to do that because, and again,
you don't think it's good enough if you just subtract Braun and run with that 6, especially if you have a guy like Zamula, kind of, hopefully coming up and blah blah blah. And
I mean, look, I know there's going to be people who are also going to turn around and say that the other option is that Sam Moran could come back healthy and
that could
be
happen.
That guy, and
There's also Wyatt Wiley will have his contract next year. Mark Friedman came up and played okay.
Friedman's an interesting one. That one I'll give you. Friedman's an interesting one, at least in that,
Like, I wonder if the Flyers just let Braun walk and take that 3.8 as cap space and just take it.
It's really tough. I mean, if the cap would have gone up like people thought, and if it would have gone up $1 million to $2 million to $3 million, then I think you take away the money that was supposed to be given, and you would have technically almost $5 to $6 million of cap space from the 3 defensemen that need new contracts. I don't think you can go crazy with the other 2 RFAs that I know we're going to talk about.
I was going to say, I was about to transition to Robert Hagg next. Yeah.
I don't think you can go up like crazy because he knows his role, and he wasn't completely always in the lineup. And Phil Myers will make $1 million next year.
Right. Robert Hagg, real quick, 25 years old. He made 1.15 this year. He is an RFA with arbitration rights. I imagine his next contract is going to look very similar to the contract he is currently finishing up, 2 years, 1.15 per. I have a feeling the next one's going to look pretty similar to it.
Right.
Phil Myers, I agree. That's probably going to be a bridge deal. You might get 2 or 3 years out of him just because of the flat cap. You might get 2 or 3 years at $1 million. Anything else you had to say on defense here? The Flyers don't have a super complicated situation, which is nice.
No, they don't. I mean, basically, what the complicated situation comes down to. I don't think Braun is staying, and then if you want another veteran guy like that, where do you turn for him? Because I don't know that there's much out there.
But there's always guys out there. Even if you say there's not much out there, there's always veteran, borderline NHL guys. They're always there. I don't know how many of them you want, but you'll have access to it.
I mean, free agency wise, there's just not a whole lot out there that you need.
Well, you can pick one up in a trade, right? You're talking about that ghost money moving, and there's plenty the Flyers can do.
There's stuff they can do. I don't think I would trade Ghost in a situation where I get another defenseman, though. That's fair. Because to me, the biggest thing that they needed after the series, after watching the series, is you need a guy who, and I'm not saying specifically this guy. He doesn't have to be exactly this.
Okay.
You need a guy like Matt Barzal, who, when the puck was on his stick, I didn't know how they weren't going to score a goal off of that situation.
Right.
That's how dangerous he makes the rest of his teammates look.
Yeah.
You need that guy who can take complete control of his shift. And I think
Travis Konecny can be that guy, for the record.
That's what I think everybody wants him to be. Yeah. That's the thing. And I think that when you're paying a guy $5.5 million, I think that's what he's making, right? Because 5.5. Provorov's is just shy of 7.
6.75, yeah.
Right. So when you're paying a guy $5.5 million, and here's the thing, Konecny totally lived up to that contract in the regular season.
Yeah.
In his first year of a 6-year contract, scoring 24 goals, on pace to do more, obviously, because the season got cut short.
Right.
And
ended up with 27, 28. Yeah.
And to play, the problem with your theory about him in the playoffs and that first playoff experience against a team like Pittsburgh is he still scored a goal in that 6-game series.
I understand.
And it was 6 games. This is 16. And he basically had one really good game where he looked like his offensive self, and the rest of the time was as frustrated as he could be.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's beyond criticism for sure. I'm just saying that me personally, when it comes to Travis Konecny, I'm giving him a little bit. I don't want to call it a pass, because a pass makes it sound like he can do no wrong, whatever, and that's not the case. I'm not going to criticize him as harshly as maybe I would if he was 2 or 3 years older or had a little bit more playoff experience. Or he's not. I know he's getting paid like a leader, like he's getting paid more than Sean Couturier, for example. Yeah. I'm not going to crucify the kid because he didn't live up to that in the postseason, his first real chance at being a good playoff team.
Now, I'll say this. I appreciate you coming on and making him one of the guys you put your focus on. And I understand, because everybody's going to look at Claude Giroux, Jake Voracek, Sean Couturier to an extent, and James Van Riemsdyk. Right. They're the guys who get all the attention because they're the guys who have been here for too long. That's what it comes down to. I'm going to write something later this week on it because I put in the preview for Game 7, and I was ready to write this after Game 5, so let's prepare for that. The reason Claude Giroux is focused, and I said this on the air too, is at the end of the day, and I know it's a team game.
Yeah.
But Claude Giroux is the captain of a team and was becoming the focus. He's on a team in 2010 as what, a 22-year-old? I believe what he was at that time.
Something like that, yeah.
Because he's 31, 32 now, so yes. Right. So he's 22 years old.
So he's not even wearing
He's-
an A yet.
He's just starting his career. It's his first, I think it was either his first or second full year.
I think it was,
And-
I think it was his first full year.
And he's on a team that finds a way to make history. Down 3-0 in a playoff series.
As
wins
not
the
a very
series.
good team.
Right. Now, hold on. Wins that series. Takes the momentum. Runs right through Montreal to go to the conference or goes to the Stanley Cup final.
Yep.
Where, by the way, throughout, Claude Giroux's been a big piece of this
Has been
puzzle.
great.
Has an insane game 5 against New Jersey where they win the series because he scored 2 goals in that game, I believe.
Yep.
Even without scoring goals in the Boston series, has just an insane shift at the end of game 7 where he rags the puck, plays his role, does exactly what he needs to do, and doesn't give Boston a sniff for a minute and a half.
Holds
That's
the
amazing.
puck forever, it seems like. Yeah.
In the Montreal series, comes out as one of the top players out of that series, or emerges as a player who's scores a game-winning
going to be that guy.
Scores a game-winning goal in overtime in the Stanley Cup final that essentially revitalizes the series because it's 2-0. You lose that game, it's 3-0. You're
done. Right.
So all that happens. Then the next year, he's got a bigger role, better regular season.
Claude Giroux, more Stanley Cup final wins than Eric Lindros.
Claude Giroux the next year, better regular season. They win the first round in a 7-game series that was ugly, and then they get swept by Boston.
Yep.
Done. And this is one of the first years he's kind of more in the spotlight. Then comes the 2012 season.
We all know the passing of the torch. And
we know this story. But after that series where he has such a big part and the shift of his own happens,
yep.
They go out, they win game 1, they lose the next 4. He doesn't even play in game 5 because he got suspended.
Yep.
I'm not sure many people out there remember that.
I don't know if anybody remembers that.
Right. Okay. So then what happens from there? Miss the playoffs, make the playoffs, first round exit. Miss the playoffs, make the playoffs. Just copy paste the rest of it. To me, like the story was Claude Giroux's legacy is being defined by 1 goal in the last 26 playoff games.
Right.
Right. To me, the legacy that's defining it was at that time, everyone was talking about it, 2 wins in the second round of the playoffs as one of the leaders of this team over the course of 9 years. That honestly, that's we can't get past this point with this guy. And he's changed it slightly because now it's 4, not 2. And they won 2 big games and he was excellent in game 5.
Yeah.
But the legacy is being defined as I can't get past the second round guy. And the problem is he's still at the forefront, not just as the captain, but he's on the first line and he's the one who the power play is running through. And until you change those 2 things, he's not a first line winger. He's not on the first power player. He's not the guy it runs through. That's going to be the story. It will come back to him all the time. And his role is not that anymore. And that's another big thing that they need to change is it can't be him.
Well, and I called it on the show last week. Who that guy might be is number 23. And we saw him 5 hours after I said that, he took warm-ups.
Oh, I know. And it's not
No, I know. I'm looking at it
standpoint.
I'm looking at it next year, and if your first line is Lindblom, Couturier, and then Konechny's there, or Voracek's there, or whoever, well, there you go. We're getting there.
It extends beyond Giroux because, like, to me, by the end of next year, James Van Riemsdyk can't be on this team. Or not by the end, but after next year, he can't be on this team. Once you go through expansion, you got to find a way for him to not be on this team anymore. If Ron Hextall sets you up for all of this with drafting Lindblom and Frost and Farabee and Nolan Patrick
and Carter
Hart and Ivan Provorov and Travis Konechny and all those guys who are making impacts already and made a great deal to sign Sean Couturier at low value when he could have went big, all that. The worst thing he did was lock them into a contract like that one.
Yes.
That's the worst thing he did. And I get it. It was a free agency year where the only other thing that was out there that made anybody, get out of bed was John Tavares, who wasn't signing anywhere near here. But I think you would have been better suited to have waited and not signed the guy who you expected to be scorer
and just taking
your lumps and picked something else or found a different direction to spin it. I mean, honestly, they would have been better off going for a different goalie.
Speaking of goalies, one more name before we get out of here. Brian Elliott is up after this year. He made $2 million this season. He's a UFA. If he is happy playing 35 games next season, he'll probably sign for about 1.5. Is that about right?
I find any way you can to do it. Here's the thing. We talked about this flat cap, and everybody knows it. If there's a guy who understands, I may not make as much as I did last year and need to do it to help you. Like, I think about this, and I don't know why. Like, I wonder if anybody would consider, like, I don't know if it's a thing in the NHL. It might not be at all. It might be something that rarely happens. But I wonder if with the flat cap, if people don't start talking about, like, what the NFL does. When you need a little space, you restructure a guy's contract midway through because you go, this is how it works. Your role's different. I need you to do this.
We got to change.
We'll make it up make it up in some way, but we need less of the cap, right?
So
Brian Elliott's the one guy who, under the flat cap, will get the situation and go, if I have to take a cut, I'll do it to play the whatever. Because I think he comes out of this playoff knowing it's not going to be a true tandem anymore anyway. No. It's not his team. It's definitely not, he's the second goalie, but you still need a guy like that. And in fairness, even if he's not the guy, there are going to be a number of goalies out there in free agency.
On a goalie free agency
you will
market,
find somebody who will fill that role.
Probably helps you get Brian Elliott cheaper, because if he was a free agent any other year, he might be the third or fourth best goalie on the market.
And obviously, I'm not talking about Braden Holtby or something like that. I'm sitting here talking about.
But that's what I'm saying. That might even be able to get you Brian Elliott a little bit cheaper, because there is all that competition out there.
Yeah.
But we'll find out what the Flyers choose to do kind of as we move forward here. There's a lot of cap decisions to be made, a lot of transactions that could be made, may be made. The draft is in about a month and a half. It's time to start thinking about the offseason. And as we move into next week, like I said, I'm going to try to get some people on this show and do a little bit of a post-mortem, maybe a little bit of a postseason party here. Before we get out of here, make sure to follow us on Twitter. It's all behind Kevin if you're watching on YouTube. At YWT Podcast. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso. He can also be found at Flyerdelphia on game days. Won't see them for a while. But he does tweet at Sports Talk PHL, and all his stuff can be found on at sportstalkphilly.com, as well as that is also where the podcast can be found.
I was going to say, Flyerdelphia gets the stories and gets the podcast too. Right. So you'll find it there too. It's not, absolutely. It's still worth it. If nothing else, I got time to work on graphics. It'll be fun.
Absolutely. And make sure to follow us pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Twitter. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram, Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. So until next week, that is the end of the 2020 Philadelphia Flyers experiment. Kevin, anything to say before we get out of here?
Yeah, because I'm going to post something personally about this later, because this year was one of the most fun years I've had doing this. It was fun to watch a good team, a team that made the playoffs, had some success. And I'm going to thank a number of people in this later on. Like it's going to be a long post on Facebook. It's going to be number of tweets on Twitter and stuff like that. But one of the thanks has to go to this show and giving me a place to come on almost every week and talk about some stuff. And the way I also phrased it too was, let's put it this way, how many different things that we had talked about, because one of the things I had in my mind, should they have won the series, was with either game 6 or game 7 of that series, we had just done, in all of the time we were off, no games, right?
Yep.
Oh, what's the best games in franchise history? We might have had a new entrant.
Game 6 is there.
Game 6 is a lower seed one now because they didn't win the series, but otherwise it did become one of those situations. And you're watching stuff like that, and we just had those conversations. It was great to have that when we didn't have actual games to go to, and to do the storytelling on weeks that we, every other week and stuff like that. So it was cool to do that.
And I do want to thank you for coming along. When we started this season, is when the podcast came back. And it was about 12 months ago at this point. And I'll just pull behind the curtain here a little bit.
The partnership's almost a year old. I can't believe that.
I'll pull behind the curtain here a little bit. We released our first episode back, and we got a message from Sports Talk Philly saying, hey, do you guys want to do the thing? And that's how we ended up with Kevin.
Do the thing.
I mean, listen, I don't know. That's how it happened. Okay.
It is. Oh, it's how it happened. That's for sure. But
either way, we will make sure to retweet that when it comes out. I'll make Mike do it. And so people can see all your stuff. That sounds awesome. Thank you for a wonderful season as a new member of the YWT team. It's good to have you.
It's only the beginning. And look, whether it's here in other spots, I'm going to chat with the station about getting a podcast going over there too at some point in time, because with our own guys, because they like to keep it in house with that type of stuff. We don't take even their baseball podcast has everybody was connected to the station, and their football one is connected. So I want to get something on there too, because I feel like we just need to keep. Everybody needs a place to go for this stuff. And we saw, again, that conversation kind of happened during the playoffs. There's places to go for your stuff, that's not always traditional. And, don't worry if you're not hearing it on the radio as much, because,
you can find it.
People have gone to other places. If you've come here and you've either read the stuff or listened to us, we thank you for it immensely.
Absolutely.
And we're not going anywhere. We'll see you next week.
I was about to say, that's a fantastic way to end it. We will be here next season, but we'll also be here next week, Sunday, 8 p.m. on your podcatcher. Make sure to subscribe and leave a review and blah, blah, blah. And until then, we'll see you next week.